You've spent months building, thousands of dollars, your costume looks incredible, and then you hit the submit button to get approved, and then nothing. No updates, no timeline, just silence. And when the feedback finally comes, it feels like the goalposts have just moved. Again. And here's the thing, it's not just you. This happens to good builders with great costumes in garrisons all over the world. It's the same organisation, the same standard, completely different experiences, and most of the time, nobody can tell you why. But what if the fix isn't about you, it's about the system? And more importantly, what would a better system actually look like? I'm the Down Under Stormtrooper, I love the 1st Legion, and I want to be upfront about that, because what comes next is honest. In my last video, I gave you the warts and all truth about what it actually takes to become a member. The commitment, the cost, the patience, and the frustration. The things that catch people off guard, and in some cases, the things that push good people away. A lot of people responded with their own similar experiences, and it was clear that this struck a nerve. But I don't want to just keep broadcasting grievances. Anyone can point out a problem. What I actually want to do is dig into where these issues come from, and put some real solutions on the table. So let's talk about where it all goes wrong. And more importantly, what we can do about it. The 1st Legion has over 14,000 active members, and it operates across almost 70 countries. It's one of the most recognisable fan organisations on the planet, and when you see a group of Stormtroopers marching in formation at a charity event or at a convention, they look exactly like that, a Legion. Unified, consistent, and operating to a single standard. And that's largely true for the costumes themselves. But behind the scenes, the way these costumes get approved, well, that's a different story entirely.
Have you modified your uniform?
Perhaps slightly. Pockets piping and some light tailoring.
The 1st operates on a federated model. At the top level, the Legion sets the framework, the charter, the operations protocol, and the costume standards. These define what an approved costume looks like and how the Legion functions as a whole. But the actual work of approving new members, reviewing submissions, issuing fix lists, and making the call on whether a costume passes, that responsibility sits with the individual garrisons. And each garrison is essentially its own operation. It recruits its own GMLs, runs its own approval workflow, uses its own tools, sets its own communication standards, and builds its own culture around how the process feels for candidates.
With great power comes great responsibility.
The Legion Charter governs the what, and the garrisons decide the how. And critically, there's no central enforcement of that how. No standard onboarding process for GMLs that every garrison follows, no mandated tools, no required templates, and no minimum response time that every candidate can count on. The Legion cares about how the Legion functions as a whole, not individually to the garrisons. To a point. That phrase, to a point, is actually going to be doing a lot of work. It means the Legion has real authority to set standards and resolve escalations. But it also means that there's a deliberate and significant amount of autonomy handed to local units.
How will the Emperor maintain control without the bureaucracy?
The regional governors now have direct control over their territories.
And this structure isn't an accident or an oversight. It makes genuine sense for an organisation of this scale. You can't centrally manage costume approvals for 14,000 members across 60 countries from a single point. Local garrisons know their communities, their members, their regional context. A garrison in Tokyo operates in a different environment to one in Texas or Sydney or Berlin. But that same autonomy is also the source of almost every systematic problem in the approval process. Because when each garrison invents its own processes from scratch, the experience of becoming a 1st member varies enormously depending on where in the world you happen to live. The standard you're held against is the same, but the experience of getting there is not.
All I'm asking for is total perfection.
And that gap between a single global structure and dozens of independent local implementations is what this video is really about. So let's start at the local level. Because if the garrison is where the process lives, then the most important person in that process is the GML, and not all GMLs are created equal. Most people assume the GML is the most important variable in their approval process. They're the one reading your photos, writing your fix list, and making the call. And it's a reasonable assumption. But the GML operates inside a culture, and that culture is set by the GCO, or the Garrison Commanding Officer. Some garrisons have a vision that they want the best costumes in the Legion. And this drives a significantly different approach to judging costumes, a more hardline approach, often above the CRL basic approval standard. Surely a human-centered approach would be better. Grow the garrison, welcome people in, Build a membership that's happy, engaged, and wants to show up, and still holding the line on the standard. Because after all, a costume that meets the CRL is a costume that meets a CRL. It's the same Legion, same CRL, completely different experience, depending on who's setting the tone at the top. The GCO's vision directly shapes what it feels like to be a candidate, which is worth understanding before we talk about the GML, because the GML is in large part executing someone else's philosophy.
We set the tone here, so let's just play it cool.
So what is a GML? Well, a GML stands for Garrison Membership Liaison. They're your primary point of contact for getting your costume approved. They receive your submission, review your photos against the CRL, issue the fix list, and ultimately make a call on whether you're in. But the role is broader than just approvals. A GML is also fielding build questions from candidates who haven't submitted yet. They're monitoring forums, they're handling membership administration. And they're doing all of this while still being a full active Garrison member with their own costumes, their own build commitments, and their own life outside the hobby. There's an official resource called the GML Survival Guide. It's housed in the Legion's internal knowledge base. It covers available Legion IDs, the costume CRL list, communication templates, and the approval process framework. But here's the problem, there's no consistent onboarding process that guarantees every new GML actually receives it. Some find it by stumbling across it. Some get it handed over by the previous GML when they're taking on the role. Some never know it exists at all. And even when a GML does find the survival guide, it covers the mechanics of the job. It doesn't teach empathy, it doesn't teach communication, and it doesn't teach how to deliver difficult feedback to someone who's just spent months and perhaps thousands of dollars on a build. That part is left entirely to the individual and the culture set by the GCO. Does that sound familiar? Who's had a manager at work who shouldn't really be in that position?
3 hours late. What's the deal?
I was at your father's funeral.
Well, maybe that excuse would have flown when my dad was here, but I'm in charge now.
I think most of us have. The GML selection problem, it's not unique to the 501st. It's a very human challenge that plays out everywhere people are appointed based on technical skills without enough consideration for how they treat those people that they're responsible for. A bad GML isn't necessarily a bad person. I think that's really important to say up front. Most of them genuinely care about the 501st. They care about the standard. And they've probably built incredible costumes and spent years in the community. But somewhere along the way, the role has shaped them in the wrong direction, or maybe they were never quite the right fit for it to begin with. They've got that fault finder mindset. They open up a photo looking for problems.
This one goes there, that one goes there, right?
Every ambiguity in CRL gets resolved in the strictest possible direction. Every borderline call goes against the candidate. Because the CRL does contain genuine ambiguity, it's a detailed document that isn't exhaustive. A GML with this sort of mindset has enormous latitude to make a candidate's life very difficult without ever technically doing anything wrong.
You strike me as the sort of person that had a hard time in high school.
Thank you.
It's a boundary issue that doesn't get talked about enough. GMLs are supposed to judge to basic approval, and that's it. If a candidate wants to pursue higher accreditation levels like EIB or Centurion, that goes to the detachment. Encouraging someone to aim higher? Yeah, absolutely. But holding a basic approval to an elevated standard crosses a line, and that happens more than it should. It's inconsistency. A bad GML applies the standard differently depending on the day, the costume, the candidate, or simply their mood. The same issue that passed last month gets flagged this month. A costume that one GML approves would be sent back 3 times by another in the same garrison. For candidates, this feels like a lottery. And a lottery isn't a process, it's just luck.
Good luck. You're gonna need it.
A bad GML sends fix lists that are vague, cold, or written in a tone that reads as dismissive. They don't explain the why behind the feedback, just the what. They leave candidates waiting weeks without acknowledgement. They mistake bluntness for professionalism. And they forget, or perhaps never registered, that the person on the other end of the email has been waiting anxiously and is reading every word very carefully. Let's talk about burnout. A GML that was great once, passionate, thorough, generous with their time, but then the volume, it's just ground them down. The thankless nature of the role's worn through. Reviews, they can take longer than they should. Feedback feels rushed. Candidates sense that they're an inconvenience rather than a person being welcomed into something special. And this isn't a character flaw, it's burnout. And the system, not the individual, is usually responsible for letting it get that far.
Do you feel stressed, Jen? Jen! Look at that! That's your peace of mind. And it's gonna go bang. Do you feel stressed now, Jen?
Jet!
So now that we know what we're trying to avoid in a bad GML, what does the other side of that look like? Well, let's start with the most fundamental shift of all, and that's mindset. A great GML doesn't open a photo asking, what can I find wrong with this costume? They're asking, how does this person get approved? It's a subtle difference in framing, but it changes everything. The standard is still the standard, that never moves. But the intent behind the review shifts from hunting for failure to looking for a path to success. From judge to mentor, from gatekeeper to guide.
Oh, hey, one last thing. And I want everyone's eyes on me when I say this. Look at me.
That single shift in mindset is the foundation everything else is built on. Now let's talk about the attention to detail. That's a technical side and it's learnable. You know, reading a CRL, understanding what each element requires, knowing where a belt should sit, how a helmet should fit, and what seam work is acceptable. A great CML is forensic, systematic, and they work through the CRL element by element, noticing what's there and what's missing from the photos entirely. A great GML never loses sight of what they're actually looking at, a real person who has probably spent months on this. They've researched, they've watched build threads at midnight, they may have spent thousands of dollars or $2,000 or more.
Shut up and take my money!
A great GML remembers what it feels like to be a candidate. This is the quality that's hardest to screen for, and it's the hardest to develop if it's not already there. What about communication? Clarity, tone, responsiveness. A great GML doesn't just say what needs fixing, they explain where it is in the CRL and why it matters, and what good looks like. And they know that even a brief acknowledgement, hey, received your submission, I'll review it in X number of days, transforms the candidate experience. Another thing to consider is that CRLs change. A GML who issues a fixed list based on an outdated understanding isn't just being unhelpful, they're potentially causing a candidate to spend time and money correcting something that isn't required.
Yeah, that's one fine-looking barbecue pit. Why doesn't mine look like that?
And here it is, the honest bit. Some skills can be taught, some can't. Attention to detail can be developed with the right training and supervised reviews. Communication skills are partially teachable, structure, templates and tone. These are learnable behaviours. But empathy, the genuine care for the person on the other end of the email, that's much harder to instill in someone who doesn't start with it. And this is why the recruitment and selection of a GML matters as much as the training. The best GMLs are technically excellent and genuinely want to see people succeed. So now, knowing what great looks like is one thing. But later in this video, we're going to get specific, the actual communication practices and systems that any garrison can adopt to make that standard consistent. But first, we need to talk about what happens even to the best GML when the pressure becomes unsustainable. Picture a Tuesday night. You've had a full day of work. You've got family commitments. And sitting in your inbox are a handful of costume submissions, each one from a real person who spent months building and is now waiting on you. And some of them are chasing you daily.
Are we there yet?
No!
Are we there yet? No, we are not! Are we there yet?
No!
You might be a GML, but you're also a volunteer, and that queue, it's not getting shorter. This is the GML's reality when the system's under pressure. And that system gets under pressure more often than candidates ever see. Membership demand doesn't arrive at a steady pace, it moves with Star Wars itself. So a major theatrical release sends a wave of newly energised fans straight towards Survivor first. And that wave hits the GML inbox with no additional infrastructure, no temporary support, and no warning beyond, hey, the movie comes out in December. The streaming era has been somewhat gentler. The Mandalorian and or Obi-Wan, they generate interest, but the evidence suggests TV doesn't really move the membership needle the same way that a big cinematic release does. The spikes are smaller and shorter until the next big film announcement lands. Convention season, it creates its own surges. So candidates who have been building for months, suddenly they've got a deadline. They want to be approved and in kit for that big convention and that big event. And the queue doesn't care. A GML who's been managing a steady trickle of submissions in October can find themselves absolutely buried in November. And the maths can get brutal, even a small number of submissions arriving at once, with varying photo quality, varying costume complexity, and varying candidate patience, is a fundamentally different job to manage in one at a time. And the Fiverr First has no formal mechanism for dealing with it, no one-core pool of trained reviewers, no way to distribute load across garrisons, and there's no system that flags when a queue has exceeded a manageable threshold. The expectation is that GMLs will absorb whatever comes in. And when they can't, when candidates are chasing them down daily and the queue isn't moving, the experience turns toxic. quickly. GMLs start to feel harassed, and candidates, they feel ignored. And without a GCO willing to step in front of that frustration and absorb it on behalf of the team, the GMLs are exposed to it all directly. And some garrison commanding officers, they do step up. But others have been known to do the opposite, to throw the GML team under the bus publicly when candidate complaints escalate. And that's not hypothetical, that happens.
Brother, help me!
Long live the king.
The thankless nature of the role is that when a candidate gets approved smoothly and feels genuinely welcomed into the Legion, nobody posts about it. There's no fanfare, there's no recognition of the GML. And you know what? That's just the process working as it should. But when something goes wrong, a slow response, confusing fix lists, a candidate feels hard done by, that gets talked about. On forums, in group chats, and on social media. And the GML hears about it when they failed, but they very rarely hear about it when they've done something exceptional. The role extracts a lot, and it gives very little back. Eventually something's got to give. A GML, they burn out, they move on, or they simply run out of capacity. When that happens, there's often no formal handover. There's no required documentation of the queue status, no standardised record of where each candidate is in their journey, what's been discussed, or what was informally agreed. The full history of every active submission lives in one person's email inbox. And when they leave, it goes with them. The successor, they inherit a queue of strangers. And the candidate waiting on the other side have no idea any change has happened. They're still expecting a reply from someone who's no longer in the role.
Anybody! Help!
For candidates mid-process, this can mean starting over. Previous fixes that were agreed upon, context that existed only in a private email thread, gone. This isn't a rare edge case. It's what happens every time GML steps down without a structured handover. And there's nothing in the current system that prevents it. So the GML, they're under pressure, the system doesn't manage, and they're working from documents the system doesn't maintain. So let's talk about our next topic, the CRLs. These are the rule books that they're supposed to be judging against, and they have their own serious problems. When you love something as much as the people in this community love Star Wars, it's really easy to forget how hard the path to joining actually is. You've done it. You know the forums, you know the terminology, you know what a cover strip is and why it matters. But cast your mind back. Or better yet, imagine someone who's just watched A New Hope for the first time. They've fallen in love, found the 501st exists, and they're now sitting at their kitchen table staring at a CRL for the very first time. That experience, for a lot of people, is genuinely daunting.
I know some of these words.
And it's important to understand the scale of the problem. Counting the full CRLs currently in the library, the Legion has well over 580 individual costume entries, covering everything from the original A New Hope Stormtrooper to obscure EU characters from novels and games that the casual Star Wars fans probably never heard of. And each one has its own document. Each one needs to be written, maintained, updated when the standards change, and kept in sync with the community's evolving understanding of screen accuracy. And the CRL homepage itself carries a gentle warning. This library is pretty extensive, so make sure you have some time on your hands. This is a massive, living, breathing, volunteer-maintained library covering 25 years plus of Star Wars content, and it shows. The quality and completeness of individual entries varies enormously because it has to. And that context, it matters because when we talk about what needs to be improved, we need to be honest about the scale of the task. You cannot fix 580 plus CRLs overnight. Any meaningful improvement, it has to be prioritised, starting with the most popular costumes and then moving to those more obscure ones. Fix those and you improve the experience for the largest number of candidates. And the rest, that just follows over time. And before we get into what's still broken, it's worth acknowledging what's improved. The CRL team recently updated how CRLs are presented, a new format that's cleaner, better structured, and more visually accessible than what came before. And that's a meaningful improvement, and it deserves recognition. But a better container doesn't automatically fix the content inside. The clear presentation of unclear language is still unclear language, and making those gaps visible is not the same as closing them. CRLs are written by passionate experts who know these costumes inside and out, and that's exactly the problem. When you know something deeply, it's very hard to remember what it feels like to not know it. So you write in a language that you use when you talk to other experts, and what comes out the other end can nearly be impossible for a newcomer to interpret.
Now, basically, the only new principle involved is that instead of power being generated by the relative motion of conductors and fluxes, it is produced by the modal interaction of magneto-reluctance and capacitive directance.
And some CRL authors, they have a tendency to want to make themselves sound important. The language, it gets dressed up. Simple requirements get wrapped in complex phrasing. Now, what could be said in plain English gets buried in terminology that feels more at home in a legal document than a costume reference. Now, think about what that language looks like to a complete newcomer. Somebody who's never built a costume before, who doesn't know what lateral alignment means, who can't picture what a trapezoidal raised relief looks like without a clear photo right next to the words. There's a concept in document design called reading level, a measure of how easy or hard a piece of writing is to understand. And it's really important to keep it as low as possible, right to the person who knows the least, not the person who knows the most. Not because the audience is unintelligent, but because clarity serves everyone and complexity serves no one. And this matters even more when you consider that the Fight for First is genuinely an international organisation. A significant portion of members are not native English speakers.
The babelfish is small, yellow, leech-like, and probably the oddest thing in the universe. It feeds on brainwave energy, absorbing unconscious frequencies and excreting a matrix of conscious frequencies to the speech centers of the brain. The practical upshot of which is that if you stick one in your ear, you instantly understand anything said to you in any language.
When CRL language is already dense and technical in English, run it through a translation tool and you end up with something that isn't just unclear, it's actively misleading. Simple language translates well. Complicated language doesn't. If the only guidance is a dense written description with no visual reference, different GMLs, they're going to interpret it differently. CRL should combine written requirements with visual reference images so that candidates can clearly see what they're building towards. In practice, the two don't always match. Sometimes the written requirements have been updated, but the photos, they haven't been refreshed. And sometimes new photos were added, but the text wasn't updated to align. And the result is a document where the picture shows one thing and the words describe another. And this matters enormously when you're mid-build making decisions that will cost you time and money if you get them wrong. And it explains something candidates often experience as the moving goalpost problems. And that's where two GMLs review the same costume reaching different conclusions. Sometimes that's an inconsistency on the GML's part. And sometimes it's the CRL being inconsistent with itself, and both GMLs are simply landing on different parts of it. What would genuinely help is a dedicated photo gallery requirement built into every CRL, not just a front-on reference shot, but detailed close-up photography of individual parts from multiple angles. The chest plate from the front, from the side view, and from below. Each part given its own set of images that make the written requirement almost redundant because you can simply see what's needed. And for almost 600 CRLs, that's a significant undertaking. But as a standard for new CRLs and for updates to the most popular ones, it would transform the candidate experience and reduce the interpretive burden on GMLs at the same time. If you're a GML or a CRL author, readability, it's not a nice to have. It's got to be part of the standard. A requirement that can't be understood, well, it can't be met. And a requirement that means different things to different people in different languages, it's not standard at all. It's a source of inconsistency baked into the process from the start. And when the rulebook is this hard to interpret consistently, what happens to the people who have to live by it? Well, that's where we're going to explore next. Now, before we follow this journey, here's a quick note. The character you're about to meet is fictional, but everything they experience is drawn from real accounts, from interviews, from community research, and from my own experience going through this process. The details are a composite. The frustration, it's not. We've covered the structure, so the federated model, the GML role, the CRL documentation, and the gaps in the system. But structures, they don't feel things, people do. So let's follow someone through. This is Alex, 32 years old, based out of the western suburbs. Alex is a lifelong Star Wars fan, and right now, Alex wants to join the 501st Legion. Alex has always had a soft spot for the Stormtrooper. Classic, iconic, and they're instantly recognisable. But seeing a full garrison in person at Comic-Con, armour that looks screen accurate, moving as a unit, that turns a vague idea into a real one. Hey, I could do that. So Alex starts looking into it. The 501st website, some YouTube videos, a few forum threads, enough to get a picture of what this organisation actually is and what joining it involves. The next logical step is the CRL, the Costume Reference Library. This is the document that defines what an improved Stormtrooper needs to look like. Alex doesn't read every line at this point, but gets a sense of the scope of it. There's requirements here, real ones. This isn't just building something that looks close enough. From here, Alex finds the local garrison, Twin Suns, and registers on the forums. The forum technology is a little bit older than Alex expected. Finding the right section takes a bit of clicking around, but eventually Alex finds the Twin Suns area, posts an introduction, and gets a response. Hey, there's people here. The community, this is real. Stage 1 ends with Alex feeling sure about one thing. The Stormtrooper is the right choice. The CRL, it gives a great sense of the requirements, but there's a lot to take in. It's new territory, but there's community there. People are answering questions, sharing builds, pointing newcomers in the right direction. And you know what, that counts for a lot when everything else feels a little overwhelming. The second stage is build and prepare. The first thing Alex needs to do is figure out where to actually get the kit. This isn't as simple as a Google search. Kit quality, it varies enormously, and the community has strong opinions about what's worth buying. FISD is where that knowledge lives. Build threads, supplier reviews, recommendations from people who've already been through it. Alex spends time there reading, comparing, and asking questions. Eventually a decision gets made, an order gets placed. A significant amount of money changes hands, and then Alex waits. And then the box arrives. Alex opens it and finds a box full of white armour pieces. The shapes, they're all there, recognisable immediately. Chest plate, helmet, shins, thighs. It looks like a Stormtrooper kit. But every piece has excess plastic around the edges. That needs trimming, everything needs cleaning up, and none of it's assembled or fitted yet. The potential here is obvious. The work required to realise it, it's equally obvious. And this is where the real learning begins. Alex prints out the CRL. It's going to be a consistent reference throughout the build. And they also start a build thread on the forums, documenting the progress and inviting feedback from the community. Alex gathers tools, techniques they're studied, and there's a lot to learn. Trimming, strapping, gluing, heat forming. None of it's difficult in isolation, but all of it's new. And then comes the moment every first time builder dreads. That first cut. And I remember this feeling really well. You've read everything, watched everything, prepared as much as you possibly can, and it still feels like a massive leap. But what gets Alex through this is the armour party. Now, an armour party is exactly what it sounds like. Experienced garrison members getting together to help newcomers build their kits. It's hands-on guidance, shared tools, somebody who's done this before standing next to you and saying, gut here, not there. It's that forum community made physical. And for Alex, it's what turns that first anxious cut into something that's manageable. And from here, the build is underway. The build will take as long as it takes. For some people, that's a few months. For others, it's a few years or more. You know, life has a way of intervening. Work gets busy. But Alex keeps coming back to it. The printed CRL is never far away. It's checked and rechecked as each piece takes shape. The build thread keeps ticking over, community members dropping in with feedback and encouragement. And then we get to submission. The build, it's done. Or at least done enough to submit. Alex has been cross-referencing the CRL throughout and feels confident that the costume meets the standard. So now it's time to document it. Photos. And lots of them. The CRL and the registration process outline what's needed, but photo requirements are one of those things that are easier to misread than they seem. Alex takes what they feel are a comprehensive set. Methodical, careful, covers all the obvious angles. And then the 501st.com account is created. The registration form, it's filled out. Alex reads back through everything one more time, then hits submit. The response, it comes back reasonably quickly, but it's brief, it's formal. There's no greeting by name, just a notification that the submission has been received and it's under review. Alex reads it twice. The submission is in, that much is clear. But some of the language in the photo request takes a moment to pass. Alex cross-references the CRL to work out exactly what photos are needed, takes them and resubmits the same day. But the email didn't quite feel like it was written for someone who was new to this. And then the wait resumes. The submission's in, the GML knows it's there, but beyond that, Alex has no real visibility. No status tracker, no queue position, no estimated time frame. No way to know what the review will find out or how long it will take. All Alex can do is wait and see. And then the feedback is here. It's a fix list. It's formal, bullet pointed, and no greeting, no acknowledgement of the work that's gone into the build, just a list of items that require attention. Alex reads through it once, then again. This isn't an approval, and I remember this feeling. You put months into this, you've checked and rechecked the CRL, you've done everything you knew how to do. It doesn't matter that fixes are a completely normal part of the process. In that moment, it stings. Alex reads through the list, again, more carefully this time. The dressing issues, they make some sense. The armor pieces aren't quite sitting right in photos. The way Alex dressed for the shoot, without another experienced pair of hands to help, meant that some pieces shifted out of position. Thigh armor, that's different. Alex knows what thigh armor is. But what does the CRL profile requirements actually mean in practice? The fix list doesn't say. Alex reads it several times and still isn't entirely sure what's being asked. I've been there too. You're not sure if you're misreading something obvious or if the feedback genuinely isn't clear enough to act on. Either way, you're stuck. Alex goes back to the GML with the question. The response comes back promptly. It's no warmer than the first email. It's a bit more information, but still not enough to know exactly what to do or how to do it. So Alex turns to the community.
Avengers!
Assemble.
And this is where the picture finally becomes clear. It turns out the issue is what builders call tube legs. The thigh armor is sitting cylindrically like a tube around the leg, rather than being shaped to follow the natural contour of the thigh. Now, it's careful cutting work and getting the sizing right takes patience, but once you know what you're doing, it's achievable. The knowledge was out there, it just wasn't in the feedback. Once the thighs are sorted, Alex reaches out to the garrison contact to help with the reshoot. With an experienced pair of hands helping to dress the armor properly this time, the photos are taken comprehensively. Well lit, everything covered. Alex resubmits. Then the feedback comes back on the resubmission. The thighs are approved, but there's a new item on the list. Alex stares at this for a moment. This wasn't on the first list. The calves were there in the original photos, the cover strips were clearly visible, and now 2 rounds in, it's being flagged for the first time. It feels like the goalposts have moved, and a quiet question starts forming that's really hard to shake. Is this the last change, or will there be something else after this? All Alex can do is fix it and find out. Alex gets it done, calls in the garrison contact again to help with dressing, retakes the photos, and resubmits. The response comes back the next day. Congratulations, Trooper, welcome to the 501st Legion. The first thing Alex feels is relief. Not excitement, not yet. Just relief. It's the weight of everything that's been building for months, the investment, the fixes, the waiting, the quiet nagging question of whether there would always be something else. And I know exactly what this feels like. And I think if you've been through this process, you know it too. The fact that approval feels like relief, like finally getting out the other side of something, says as much about the journey as it does about the destination. And then the elation arrives. Alex is now a member of the 501st Legion. And then the first trooper comes just a few weeks later. Now in full kit for the first time, doing the thing that started all at Comic-Con. It was worth it. But let's be honest about the journey that got Alex here. The forum technology that should have welcomed newcomers felt like a maze. After submission, there was no way to know where things stood, no queue, no time frame, just silence. The GML communication route was functional at best, procedural, jargon heavy, and never once acknowledged the person on the other end of it. The fix list feedback was unclear enough that Alex had to turn to the community to understand what was actually being asked. And a fix that should have been caught in round 1 didn't surface until round 3. Now, none of these things stopped Alex, but they added friction and uncertainty and frustration to a process that's already demanding enough. And the good news? Every single one of those problems is fixable. So let's talk about how. The problems Alex experienced required 2 things: better communication habits and a small shift in how the work gets organised. So let's start with communication. Because as Chris Stewart, the GCO of the Southern Cross Garrison and someone who spent years in a GML role puts it, the common theme is always, we've done a great job because we've communicated really well, or we've done a bad job because we've communicated really poorly. There's never anywhere in between. So here are 5 fixes. Each one's practical and each one is achievable, and none of them require anything other than intention. And fix number 1 is welcoming candidates intelligently. The first official touchpoints most candidates have with their garrison isn't a submission. It's not a fix list, it's a forum registration, and right now, that moment is almost entirely wasted. A generic welcome post tells Alex that the community exists, but it doesn't tell Alex anything about the journey that's ahead. The biggest pain point for candidates, as one experienced GML described it, is that they just don't know what they don't know. They don't know which forums matter. And they don't know that a decision that they're about to make during the build will create a problem that they'll only discover in a fixed list 3 months from now. And the fix is a fairly straightforward concept. When a new member registers, ask them which costume they're planning to build. And then use that answer, create a curated welcome pack specific to that costume type that lands in their inbox. It'll link to the current CRL directly. And a plain language summary of things that newcomers to that costume consistently don't know. The key elements that look CRL compliant but aren't, the photo angles that catch people out at submission, the common first round items that are trivial to address during the build and costly to fix afterwards. None of this information is new, it exists in the community already. What's new is that it reaches the candidate at the moment it's actually useful, before the money's spent, before the kit's ordered, before the decisions that are hard to reverse have already been made. This doesn't require a GML to write a bespoke email for every registration. It requires someone at Garrison or Legion level to assemble the resource pack once, per costume type, and keep it reasonably current. The ongoing cost is low, but the impact on every candidate who comes through that door afterwards is immediate. Fix 2 is acknowledgement. Immediately when a submission arrives, send a message, not a review, just a note confirming receipt. Let them know we have it, we're working on it, expect to hear back within X days. And be honest, if there's a backlog, if 20 submissions come in the week after a convention and the queue is genuinely long, say so. Tell the candidate there's a high volume of approvals right now and you're estimating it'll take X weeks to get to their review. A candidate who knows they're in a long queue and roughly when to expect movement is in a fundamentally better position than a candidate who hears nothing. It's a 2-minute job and it doesn't matter how busy someone is. The candidate who has just spent months building, in many cases thousands of dollars, and doesn't know if anyone's seen their submission yet. But you know what? They feel that 2-minute email immediately. And the anxiety, the daily inbox checking, the wondering whether something's gone wrong, it just stops. Fix 3 is to catch everything first time. The goal is to identify every issue in one pass, all of them from one review in one communication. The target, 1 email, 2 at most. But of course this is much harder than it sounds. It requires working through the CRL element by element, systematically, methodically, before writing a single word of feedback, checking not just what's visible, but what's missing from the photos entirely. But the investment immediately pays back. Fewer rounds, fewer emails, and this is what kills the moving goalpost feeling. Not because the standards changed, because it absolutely hasn't, but because when everything's on the table from the start, the candidate knows exactly where they stand. There are no surprises at round 3. Fix 4 is to be a mentor, not a judge. Now this one's a mindset shift before anything else. The question in GML asked walking into every review shouldn't be, what's wrong with this costume? It should be, how do I get this costume approved? And that single reframe, it changes everything. Now the standard doesn't move, that never changes, but the intent behind the review shifts from hunting the failure to looking for a path to success. And the sandwich approach is definitely part of it. Acknowledge what's working, deliver the fixes clearly, and close with something encouraging. But that's the floor, not the ceiling. The best GMLs, they go further. If the fix list is long or complex, offer a call to walk through it together. If the candidate's local, suggest meeting in person, an armor party of 1. And for common issues, include direct links to relevant build threads or community resources. Don't just tell someone their thigh armor needs reshaping, point them to the thread where someone documented exactly how to do it. A fix list, it's not a verdict, it's a roadmap. And a GML who treats it like that will get their candidates to the finish line faster, with less frustration on both sides. Now fix 5 is show, don't tell. When a fix involves something visual, annotate the candidate's own photo. Add an arrow pointing to the specific element, a circle around the area in question. 30 seconds of work that eliminates an entire back and forth chain of emails. And go one step further, include a reference image of a correctly built or approved version of the same part. The candidate can then place their own piece directly alongside an approved example and see exactly what they're working on. No interpretation required, no guessing, just a clear before and after. So these 5 fixes, they could start tomorrow. No new systems, no governance changes, nothing other than intention of a GCO willing to set the expectation of their teams. But even if every GML adopted them, and that's a lot of ifs, there's still a structural problem sitting underneath the process that communication alone doesn't fix. And that's the invisible queue. It's the problem that no email can solve. Think about what the GMLs world looks like from the outside. 3 GMLs, 30 active submissions, every one at a different stage. Some waiting for photos, some with fixed lists out, some resubmitted and pending review. Some have stalled and no one's checked in for a month. And where does all that live right now? It's in email inboxes, in someone's head. Maybe a shared spreadsheet that got abandoned because it created more work than it solved. One garrison hit a period where there was 30 costumes in the queue at once. There were members contacting the GMLs daily asking, have you looked at mine yet? Where am I at? Is there a problem? The GMLs weren't ignoring anyone. They were just trying to get through a backlog with no visible way for anyone, including themselves, to see the full picture. When candidates can't see where they are, they ask. When they ask, the GML has to stop reviewing to answer, which makes the review take longer, which makes more candidates ask. There's a concept that project managers use that software teams, healthcare administrators, logistics coordinators, and just about any other industry dealing with complex queues has adopted for exactly this kind of problem. It's called a Kanban board. The idea is straightforward. You take all of your work, in this case every active costume submission, and you put it on a board. Each piece of work is a card. Each card moves through a series of columns that represents the stages of the process. Those column stages, not started, under review, fixes required, fixes submitted, pending approval, approved, they're all defined at Legion level. And each garrison used the same structure. For the first time, the process skeleton is consistent across the whole organisation. Now, what happens inside each stage is still up to the garrison. How they assign tickets, how they communicate with the candidates, how they run their team, that stays local. Structure where structure matters. Flexible where it should be. Each garrison gets its own board, its own project, its own team, its own submissions. But they're all running on the same framework. The Legion subscribes to the tool centrally, configures it once, and distributes individual garrison projects from that single account. One subscription, centralized maintenance, and decentralized management. GCOs can add and manage users within their own garrison project. User provisioning at the garrison level stays with the GCO who knows their team, rather than creating a bottleneck at the Legion admin level. The cost and the configuration burden, that sits at Legion level. The day-to-day management stays local. And here's where it gets genuinely powerful. When a candidate submits their application through the existing 501st.com registration process, a Kanban ticket is automatically created and dropped into the not started column. No manual entry needed by the GML. A submission triggers the workflow. The candidate immediately has a ticket number and a visible status without anyone having to do a single extra thing. And this kind of centralized technology isn't without precedent in the costuming community. Unlike the 501st, where each garrison manages its own forum infrastructure independently, the Rebel Legion runs a single centralized forum for all of its bases worldwide. And if the Rebel Legion can consolidate their community technology across a global membership, the question's worth asking: why couldn't the 501st do the same thing with a Kanban solution? The model exists. The proof of concept is right there next door. So how does this board work for the candidates? Well, the main card is visible to the candidate. At any point, they can see exactly what stage their submission's at. And when a GML posts a comment at the main card level, an update, a fixed list, or request for additional photos, the candidate receives an automatic email notification. And what's great is they don't need to log into the tool to stay informed. The updates come to them. And each ticket carries structured metadata throughout its life: costume type, submission date, last updated date, current status, fixed round number, the CRL version referenced at the time of submission. The information travels with the ticket permanently, useful for the candidate, useful for reporting, and essential if the submission is ever disputed or revisited. The GMLs, however, will have a slightly different experience, so underneath the main card we'll set a private subtask visible only to GMLs. And this is where the internal work happens. So all photos that are submitted by the candidate, links to their build thread, the costume level that they're seeking, and every internal discussion between GMLs to date. Everything is in one place, available to any authorized GML at any time. And now the importance of this can't be overstated. Right now, the full history of a costume approval lives in one person's email box. When that GML leaves the role, the history goes with them. But with this subtask, nothing's lost. A new GML picking up a case has the complete record in front of them. A GCO reviewing a disputed decision has every comment, every photo, every fixed round available. And the record is permanent, it doesn't disappear when the costume's approved. And when a tricky case needs specialist input, the GML can invite a detachment costume advisor or another experienced GML directly to the subtask. These users have read access across all Garrison projects, but in practice only engage with tickets that are escalated to them. And if this happens, the card moves to an escalated status, giving the candidate visible, deliberate status rather than an unexplained hold. When tickets sit in a pending column beyond a defined interval, like fixes issued but no response from the candidate, the system can prompt the assigned GML to send a friendly follow-up. It's a nudge to the GML to reach out personally. It keeps candidates engaged and reduces silent dropout before any automatic action kicks in. It's also important to keep the board clean. A Kanban board that fills up with stale tickets stops being useful. So the system manages its own hygiene. If a ticket sits in fixes required beyond a defined inactivity threshold, 12 months say, it automatically moves to a did not finish and drops off the active board view. The candidate went cold. The case is closed. But the ticket is retained permanently in the system. That dropout is now visible data, something the Garrison count on and analyse rather than a submission that quietly disappeared. And likewise, approved costumes will age off the active board after a defined period too, keeping the working view focused on what actually needs attention. But again, the record stays. Every approval, every round, every comment, it's permanent and it's searchable. So what does this actually solve? Well, firstly, the problem of no queue visibility, sorted. Candidates can see the status at any time. Automated email notifications mean they don't need to check. And then there's the GML workload management, solved. The GCO sees the GMLs who are carrying too much work and which have capacity. A 30 deep queue becomes visible before it becomes a crisis. And then you've got the handover risk, solved. So when a GML steps down, the complete record of every active submission is already in the system. Nothing lives in a personal inbox. Then you've got the candidate dropout, that's partially solved. Friendly follow-up prompts keep stored candidates engaged. Garrison consistency, well that gets partially solved too. The column structure, it's the same everywhere. The process skeleton, it's shared. The individual Garrison culture and the approach stays local, but the framework underneath, it's finally consistent. And what are the benefits for the Legion as a whole? Data. Every approval, every fixed round, every costume type, every outcome. And that's a foundation for understanding where the process works and where it doesn't. Which CRLs generate the most rework? Which garrisons have the longest queues? Information that currently doesn't exist anywhere. Now in terms of what tools you can use for Kanban boards, I spent a bit of time evaluating the main options. You've got Jira, Trello, Monday.com, Asana, and ClickUp. My recommendation would likely be ClickUp. It's the only major platform offering a genuinely capable free tier to unlimited users, which is critical for volunteer organisations that can't predict how many GMLs, detachment leads, and candidates will need to access across hundreds of garrisons globally. It has native subtasks, custom fields, automations, time tracking, and Kanban views, and guest access. And that's all on the free plan. Jira is the most powerful option. I use it day to day at work, but the admin overhead for a volunteer organisation, that's a real risk. It's built for enterprise engineering teams, not GMLs. But the free options are genuinely capable and for most garrisons a strong starting point. And this would be a Legion level improvement. A centralised tool consistently configured, available to every garrison and every candidate regardless of where in the world they are. And it's important for you to mention that the Legion has governance structures that would likely need to be considered, possibly at the level of the operations protocol, before anything like this could be formalised. And I'm not an expert on exactly which levers would need to move, and I don't want to overstate what I know. But I truly believe the question is worth asking out loud. Because right now, every garrison is reinventing the wheel, and the candidates who land in a garrison that hasn't reinvented it yet are paying the price. Okay, so here's the exciting part. We've walked through what the process looks like now, and we've talked about what it would take to improve it. So let's put those two things together. Let's go back to our friend Alex. Stage 1 is still discovery. That part doesn't change. Alex sees the garrison at Comic-Con. They still feel that pull, still goes home and starts researching. The spark is the same and it always will be. No system improvement changes that moment and none of them need to. What changes is everything that comes after it. Stage 2 is build and repair. In the original journey, Alex registered on the forums, got a welcome message from the community, and then navigated everything independently. They found FISD by researching, found the right build threads by browsing. Now they had to work out which suppliers were worth considering through trial and error. The community knowledge was out there, it just had to be discovered. But in this new version, the registration process asks Alex a simple question. Do you already know what costume you want to build? And that answer changes what happens next. Instead of a generic welcome post, Alex receives a curated resource pack assembled specifically for the A New Hope Stormtrooper. The current CRL linked directly. A curated list of the most useful FISD build threads for that costume. And then it includes something that doesn't currently exist anywhere in the official process. A plain language summary of the things newcomers to this costume don't know they need to know. Now, none of this is new information. It all exists somewhere in the community already. But what's new is that it reaches Alex before the money is spent on parts that might be incorrect, not months later in a fixed list email. The biggest pain point for candidates is that they don't know what they don't know. Now, this doesn't solve the problem entirely, but it closes the gap significantly, and it does it without placing any additional burden on a GML or a volunteer mentor. And then the build itself gets underway. And throughout it, the CRL is the constant companion, printed out, referenced piece by piece as each element takes shape. But in this version, the experience is different. The requirements are written in plain language. Each element is clear and it has reference photos, close-ups that show exactly what's needed, not just a full costume front-on shot that leaves the details to the imagination. And this time when Alex checks a requirement against a piece of armour, the answer's there. It's not buried in dense terminology, it's not dependent on finding the right forum thread to decode what the text is actually meaning. In this new journey, the CRL doesn't get in the way. It does its job. And Alex moves through it with a clearer sense of what the standard actually requires. There's fewer second guesses, and fewer moments of staring at a piece wondering whether it's right. So the work is real, and the uncertainty is smaller. And then we have the submission. Now the process itself, it's still fairly similar. We've got photos that have to be uploaded, you've got the registration form, and it's the same fiberfirst.com flow. But this time there's a self-check template, a structured checklist that Alex can run through before hitting submit. And it's not the CRL in full, that's still the authoritative document. But it's a plain language, element by element guide to the most common photo gaps, the angles GMLs actually need, and the details that get missed most often. So this time around, Alex catches the posterior closure issue before it becomes the first email back. Not because the GML didn't flag it, but because Alex already knew about it. Then they hit submit. And this time, what comes back is different. Alex receives an acknowledgement. It's not a review, just a confirmation. Now in that original journey, that silence lasted days, maybe longer. Alex was checking the inbox wondering if something had gone wrong with no way to know. But in this version, Alex knows the ticket's there. The queue position, it's visible. The waiting hasn't disappeared, but the anxiety has shape now. And a shape you can see is significantly easier to sit with than avoid. And stage 4 is review and feedback. And the feedback lands this time in a stated time frame. And immediately it reads differently. GML communication is improved. So the standard here is exactly the same. The thigh armour still needs reshaping. The dressing is still non-compliant. But this time around, Alex understands what's being asked, understands why, and has a clear path to fixing it without needing to post on FISD to decode the feedback. And crucially, everything is on the table. 3 issues identified in one pass. No new item waiting in round 3. So the thigh fix, it still takes time, and the garrison contact is still called in for the reshoot. The work is real, but it's direct work, not guesswork, and that makes all the difference. Alex resubmits, and you may recall in the original journey there was a 3rd round here. A cover strip issue surfaced after the thighs were sorted, something visible in the original photos but flagged only after 2 rounds of review. In this version it was in the first fix. Alex already dealt with it. And then we hit approval and beyond. And here's the thing about this approval moment, it still feels good. The relief, it's still real, but it's a different kind of relief. In the original journey, the dominant feeling was finally getting out the other side of something. It was relief that was over, that there wasn't another thing on the list. But in this version, the dominant feeling is yes, pride, approval. The relief is smaller because the anxiety was smaller, because the process never made Alex feel lost or forgotten or like the goalposts were moving. The TK ID arrives, the forum access is elevated, and this time there's a welcome kit. Now that's not necessarily physical, though it could be. An email from the GCO. Information about what comes next. A sense that the garrison's been expecting Alex and is ready to welcome him in. The first troop's the same, the charity event, the garrison members, the thing that started all of this, Comic-Con, finally real. That part doesn't change either. But the journey that got Alex there was better. Not easier, the standard's still identical, the work is identical, but this time supported, clear, and human. That's the difference. And I want to be straightforward about what I've just described. The communication fixes, the intelligent welcome, the acknowledgement, the thorough first pass review, the mentor mindset and the annotated photo, those require no system change, no budget, no governance approval. Any garrison in the world could begin implementing those tomorrow. Now the Kanban system, that's a bigger ask. It requires a tool, configuration and a governance conversation. But the fact that it requires a bigger conversation doesn't mean that the conversation shouldn't happen. In fact, it's the one that matters the most at the level of Legion itself, because it's the one that can't be solved garrison by garrison. Right now, each garrison is building its own version of the same thing, or not building it at all and hoping email holds together. Some of them have been working well, many don't. And the question I put to Legion leadership is not a demand, it's not a prescription, simply this. At what point does the candidate experience become a Legion level responsibility? The standard is set at Legion level. The CRLs are maintained at Legion level. And of course, the charter is Legion level. But the process that connects a candidate to that standard, the thing that determines whether joining the 501st feels welcoming or grueling, it's currently left entirely to local improvisation. The gap is real and it's measurable. But you know what? It's also solvable. And I'm not in a position to make that decision. I'm one member making a YouTube video who loves this organisation enough to spend months researching why sometimes it's harder than it needs to be. And these are just my ideas. I don't present them as the only answers or the final word. What I hope to do is they spark a conversation. Get the Legion thinking about what the current processes are and whether they're serving candidates as well as they could be. Just because something's hard to change doesn't mean we shouldn't change it. Just because something is not the way we do things doesn't mean it can't be. If you've been enjoying these conversations and you want to see more, hit the like button and subscribe. It genuinely helps get this content in front of more people in the community who might benefit from hearing it and also might be in a position to instigate change. I want to end on something that I think is easy to lose sight of when you spend this much time focused on what's broken. The 501st Legion is genuinely remarkable, not despite being a volunteer organisation, because of it. Every GML who stays in that role through the hard stretches. Every GCO who runs interference so their team can focus on reviewing. Every CRL author who spends their evenings writing documentations for costumes. These people are doing something real. Something that matters to people coming through that process. The 501st Legion doesn't need saving, it needs improving, and there's a significant difference. The costume standard, it's high, but it's attainable. Alex and every candidate just like Alex, they deserve a process worthy of the organisation that they're trying to join. So thanks for watching and more importantly for listening. I'm the Down Under Stormtrooper and may those costuming gods be with you.